All right, I'm here today with my good friend, Miss RoseAnn Duplan. She is the Policy and Planning Specialist for the Oklahoma Disability Law Center. How are you today?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
So you and I usually start these by how we met. I don't remember. It would have been around 2013, probably a little before that. I would guess at a conference because that's how I met most people. Probably met you at a booth somewhere, but I can remember one of our outings, if you will. You know what I'm talking about already. We spent the night on the floor in an airport in Chicago.
We did. I was coming back from the Institute of Special Education Advocacy, right?
Yeah. And they couldn't find us a hotel. And so we had to sleep on the floor, and it was fun.
It was interesting.
So tell me how I know you're a parent, you're an advocate, and then of course your work with the Disability Law Center. Tell me how you got started.
So I have 3 kids. Well, they're adults now. So Matt is 30, Zach is 27, and Megan is 21. Zach, our middle child, was born with multiple disabilities. And so Zach was born in 93. And at that point, Sooner Start was only a few years old. And the services weren't very well established. Especially at that point, we lived on base. And so just getting services from the beginning was kind of a challenge. And I was just lucky enough to have a few parents that had kids just a little bit older than Zach who were willing to help me figure out the system. And that's really where the advocacy started, was just making sure Zach got what he needed. And because I had had those other parents help me, I started helping parents who had kids that were coming after Zach.
And you have your hands in a lot of different things. I'm always impressed with how much you do. I work with you when I have questions with IDEA law, school IEPs, things like that. You're one of my go-tos. You enjoy both, and want to say thank you for working with me on that. Of course, we did the ISEA together in 2013. I got to tell this story, and I don't know if you've heard this or if you remember if you have heard this. So I kept meeting Kayla Bauer, and I kept meeting her over and over again at conferences, and just picking her brain. And man, what an amazing advocate she was. And but I remember going through Partners in Policymaking and coming out in 2013 and thinking that I could take over the world because that's what they do. You're a Partners grad, right?
Right.
And so I decided I was going to advocate in an IEP. This was the first IEP other than my son that I had advocated in. So I went into this IEP. And I came out and I told the parent, I said, look, we didn't get what we wanted in there. Give me a day or two. I'm going to write a letter to the school saying basically what I thought. So I go through my disability law book and I start putting everything in there. Well, you didn't do this, and according to this, you should do this. And I'm quoting law. And about a week later, I get a letter from a lawyer saying, you can't quote law unless you're an attorney. I had no idea. Now, all of the training that I had gone through at the time, so up to then, nobody had told me that unless it's my child, I couldn't quote law as a lay advocate, right? So I had no idea. So I called Kayla Bauer and I basically tell her what's going on, and she says, okay, hold on just a second. And so she calls me back, and she had talked to the law firm, because somebody that you guys probably worked with quite a bit.
Right.
She said, I've got it taken care of, just don't do it again. The next thing I know, and I had been begging Kayla to go to Virginia for this training for forever. And I asked her again while I was on that same phone call. And I think out of necessity, she thought, I don't want to have to bail him out again. She basically said, why don't you go this year with us? So I'm grateful. And that's the trip that we got stuck in the
Right.
airport, but pretty amazing stuff. So let's tell me about Zach. What's he like?
Well, Zach contracted cytomegalovirus in utero, so it's CMV for short. For most adults have had CMV. It's just basically, if you see symptoms, it's probably like a cold. Where it becomes a problem usually is if you contract it for the first time while you're pregnant. It can pass through the placenta to the baby and cause a lot of different issues. It can attack any organ system in the body, and it really just kind of depends on where you're at in your pregnancy when you get the virus, how it affects the child. And I've seen kids run the range of very mildly affected. CMV is actually one of the leading causes of hearing loss. So a lot of kiddos just have hearing loss. And then I've seen, anything from babies that are stillborn to really no effects at all. So Zach has hearing loss. He has, he's profoundly deaf. He has, basically he has cerebral palsy on his left side, kind of mild. He has intellectual disabilities, and he communicates using sign language. He's pretty independent as far as, daily living skills, but, he doesn't live independently. He has no concept of danger or strangers or money, other than he knows that someone should pay for what he asks for. So, but he's done really well compared to when we left the NICU after 59 days, they told us, don't expect him to ever progress much past this state. So he's really gone on and done well above any of that.
It's really good. What kind of led, what are some of the things that you guys did at a young age to try to help? Because I know early intervention is a big deal with any child. And that's what I like to explain to parents is it doesn't matter what the diagnosis. I went into this as autism world and came out of partners with disability world because we need similar or a lot of the same things. So what were some of the things that led up, he's doing well now? What do you think?
I wholeheartedly believe that early intervention was the key for Zach. They kind of told we lucked out and have an excellent pediatrician, or had. I cried the day Zach could no longer go to the pediatrician, I'll tell you. And she just said, here's the thing. We can give you a prognosis. We don't know if we're right, we're guessing. Best case scenario is that you do everything you can now. She said, at some point, his brain will stop to develop further. We don't know if that's going to be a week. We don't know if that's going to be 20 years. So we kind of started out with the idea that we're going to cram as much into that little brain as we can, and for as long as we can. And I think that's really what paid off for Zach. That and the fact that he's just a very determined person himself. So we did anything and everything that they suggested. We did therapy, OT, PT, speech, any kind of educational or therapeutic toy that they thought would help him. We found a way to get it for him. So I think just really staying on top of it, and then capitalizing on potential. I think so many times people look at a diagnosis or a medical record and have a preconceived notion of what that child's capable of. And we just never let that happen with Zach, making sure that he was always challenged in school. From the early ages, he was in the deaf ed program. They wanted to put him in their, multiple disability or, profound kind of classes, they called them back then. And we just wouldn't go for that. He needed the sign language for communication, and he needed to have the potential, or he had the potential to learn. And we felt like, especially if we could get him to learn to read, that would be such a door opener for him, and it really has been.
I've seen you in action as an advocate. You and I are on the DD Council together. I've seen you at the Capitol working. I've seen you. You are a big voice with the waiting list, and you have your hands in a lot of different things. How do you stay on top of that? I mean, I know that's kind of a vague question, but you how do you keep going? I mean,
It's a lot. I think, like most of us, we start out, a lot of times with early intervention, families are still just getting a diagnosis and they're kind of overwhelmed, and they just kind of take what's there. But by the time they get into school, you really start seeing you're going to have to like work a little harder to get what they need. So I think a lot of us start advocating for school, and school seems like such a huge issue, and we focus on that because it is, at least 12 years of their life, a lot of times longer for our kids. So we get really heavily focused on that, and sometimes it's hard to realize there's something beyond school. But then you get into high school and you're like, oh, what's next? So that's one thing I really try to like encourage families, is looking at that whole picture, and that's what's going to come after high school, and advocating for those things that your child's going to need beyond school, because that 12 years or 14 years goes by pretty fast when you in the big scheme of things. And then you find out that once they become adults, there's just so few things available. So that's really become a bigger focus for me now. I mean, I still, of course, have my hand in the educational arena, but really looking at lifespan issues and what's available for those kiddos or adults now. My kids get mad when I call them kids because they're not, but really needing to be able to advocate for lifespan. What can they do for employment or education, or what's available for independent living? So just trying really hard to stay on top of all of those things.
who are your mentors? Who were your mentors getting started?
Well, I'm old. So Zach came along in the very early days of the internet, and being a military family, we had no family here in Oklahoma. There weren't a lot of connections. So I just kind of lucked upon, back then there weren't a lot of, listservs or Yahoo groups or things like that. There was a kind of online listserv for families who had children with CMV that was out of the Children's Hospital in Dallas. So I was able to connect with some families that way, and kind of lucked into, through that, there was a group of families who, one of the dads worked for a tech company who had sponsored a listserv for this particular group of families that had kids with hearing loss. So I was able to get into that and connect with those folks. And through that, I met a lady in Michigan. I'm in Oklahoma, and there's a lady in Michigan. Her name is Celeste Johnson. And she had an older daughter who was deaf and had gone through due process, and actually was hired then by the law firm that she had hired to do due process as a legal advocate. So she was probably my biggest mentor. And then she really encouraged me to start looking at what's available for training in your state. And so through that, I got into, partners in policy making. And that's when I really started connecting with Oklahoma advocates. And, Diana McCalmont probably was my biggest mentor here in Oklahoma. She taught the Partners program for years and years, and was a parent and a school teacher, and just, as you know, a completely wonderful mentor. I just was really lucky to have good parents. My ex-husband's commander at the time Zach was born actually had a child who was about 2 or 3 years older than Zach, who had been born with cerebral palsy. And he was very instrumental in giving us all kinds of pointers on how to get through Sooner Start. They had actually had the same case manager we did, so he was able to tell us all of the things we needed to say. So just really had a wide range of other parents helping me.
Yeah, Diana, you go back to that one. And I had her on earlier in an earlier interview, and she's just amazing. And the people that she has reached